I think it's a very appropriate session for this talk to be placed in. Well done to event organizers, or Kevin, for manipulating it like this. There was a comment earlier about as conservation agencies or NGOs, we don't want to live from hand to mouth. So while we're working on financial sustainability, trust funds are there to help you with those little bit of project grants. So I'm speaking about the Table Mountain Fund, a capital trust fund, and how it has managed to contribute towards growing the protected area network of the Western Cape. So a little bit of background on the Table Mountain Fund. It was the good old days, the Madiba era, early 90s. Investor confidence in South Africa was high. Everybody was feeling very positive and driven. And couple that with a panda bear, and a very successful fundraising campaign happened, where about 10 million rand was secured by local donors. And then the thinking at that stage was this 10 million rand would be used to secure the Cape Peninsula, hence the name, the Table Mountain Fund. But this was significantly bolstered by a very generous donation from the Global Environment Facility of an extra 30 million rand. And with this donation came a couple of caveats. So the Table Mountain Fund firstly had to be registered as a separate legal entity to WWF. Secondly, it could not prioritize funding state organization, and initially it was about funding the Table Mountain National Park, essentially, to achieve its mandate. But now it had to consider both NGOs and state, and most importantly, it was not going to be just about the Table Mountain anymore. And it became about fynbos. And so we operate across the entire Cape Floristic region, from the Northern Cape all the way into the Eastern Cape. No, we are not just concerned with keeping the mountain safe. I think the mountain is quite safe. So approximately 20 years later, 300 projects have come through the books. About 70 million rand has gone out towards conservation. And I think we can proudly say we're still going strong. So what is our purpose? So our purpose essentially is to conserve the CFR. It's quite straightforward. In our deed of trust, we have a couple of other objectives which really speak about enabling and growing the partners who are operating in the organization, helping them get established and up and running, acting as a bit of a landscape connector, bringing the right partners together, obviously maintaining the capital fund. But when it comes to conservation, we've got a very broad overarching objective, and it's about conserving the biodiversity. Many ways in which we do that, but one of our strategic objectives speaks to protected area expansion, and I'm only going to be speaking about that one. Obviously, as I said, we've got sustainable agriculture, capacity building, many other objectives, and you can chat about them over tea if you're interested. Within the Western Cape, we're quite fortunate in that we have a really well, coordinated body, a reference group that comes together. It's represented by state organizations, be it Cape Nature, City of Cape Town, and all NGOs. Anybody who's involved with protected area expansion sits on the same reference group, and it meets once every 3 months. This reference group also assesses every new property that's being considered for formal protected area expansion. So it's a robust mechanism that, as TMF, we can sit back and we can know that the right discussions are being held and that the right decisions are being made about which area should ultimately be protected and which shouldn't. It also means that us as a funder, keep in mind, we're funding the projects, we're not implementing. These are not our projects. This is us supporting our partners. Essentially, by having these reference groups established, it really lowers the risk to us. We know that we operate in the right area with the right partner. Our protected area expansion strategy in the Western Cape province is also a very collaborative document where every NGO was involved in drafting the strategy, in pinpointing exactly the areas that it sees itself operating in within the next 5 years. And then accompanying that is also what is the best mechanism to secure it. In the odd cases, there is land acquisition, it might be biodiversity stewardship, it might be conservation servitudes. What is the best mechanism to secure? And maybe the other thing to mention is that the strategy in the Western Cape province has 2 legs. The one is about growing the hectares, and the other one speaks to, I think it was Peter asked the question this morning, about what do we do about the areas that we already count as protected, which really aren't functioning. So the Western Cape Protected Area Expansion Strategy uses the term regularizing. So making sure that those areas that we already count in are actually properly protected, at least from a legal perspective. So TMF's Protected Area Expansion Program is really, we've got 3 tiers. Number 1 is old school, buying up land. Obviously very expensive, but low risk. And we don't really see land acquisition synonymous with the TMF brand. We're not such a big player. We're a small little conservation trust fund, but we will get involved if we have to. And I'll give you some examples of where we have in the past. Obviously, back in the winning horse. Currently, biodiversity stewardship is seen as the winning horse, and we have a large portfolio of programs that are really trying to support biodiversity stewardship in the Western Cape. I must also say we do support in the Eastern Cape as well, but sometimes my areas that I'm comparing and the time frames and the monies and everything makes it a little bit difficult to talk about the 2 provinces. It seems unfair because the vast majority of the Eastern Cape is not famous. And then we like to take chances. It's a nice thing about being an NGO. We're not completely risk averse. We've got a little bit of an appetite for taking a chance. So we do have some projects which might be higher risk but low cost. So we test them out, and if they're working, then great. We might change the way things happen in the future. So land acquisition, as I said, this is in partnership. This has only happened to date in partnership with Sandparks and with WWF SA. Rudderberg is the most recent one where TMF actually went on a fundraising campaign to assist, to raise the funds to buy Rudderberg. The first 2 ones, TMF drew the funds from its capital trust fund to actually help support the purchase. And no, we don't own any of that land. TMF never ends up owning the land. We buy the land, we hand it straight over to whoever the managing authority is, which in this case has always been Sandparks. Okay, so no, we're not even a revolving land trust. It never comes into our name at all. Then supporting biodiversity stewardship programs. So I'm going to run through a couple of the projects that we've had on our books over the years. So Cape Nature, the Provincial Conservation Agency, TMF have funded 2 positions within Cape Nature over the years for the legal facilitation. The person who's actually sitting with these agreements and making sure that they're ticking all the right boxes and that they've been sent off to the right people and being properly processed. TMF has funded that salary. And then we have a contract with Cape Nature at the moment, I mean not a contract, sorry, a project grant, where any of the costs associated with the legal declaration we are helping to cover. You'll often hear about how expensive it is to rezone, subdivide, what else? Have surveys on your land, declare the land. TMF is providing, I think I could safely say, all of the funds at the moment to cover that within the province. Some projects, when we're working with state organizations, it's actually difficult for the money to flow from an outside capital trust fund into a state organization who is subject to PFMA. And in those instances, we try and partner them up with who we think is a suitable conduit agency to help the agencies do what they're trying to do. So, for example, a stewardship incentive fund, again, it's a Cape Nature program, where they're offering what was initially considered an incentive. It turns out it's not really what's clinching the deal, but they're offering some type of service or outcome to the private landowners who are signing up into biodiversity stewardship. But it's very difficult for a state organization to pay money to a private landowner. So Conservation at Work is the conduit agency which that they work in, and at the same time, Conservation at Work really is just a platform for all the conservancies in the province, which we see as really your next, pool of potential landowners to be targeting to pull up into the higher tiers of protection. And then Eden to Addo, another NGO that really helped us, that TMF funded for, they got the first protected environment signed within the Western Cape. The other projects that we've got, City of Cape Town again, so here City of Cape Town have partnered up, their conduit agency is the Wilderness Foundation, and I always give thanks to the Wilderness Foundation for agreeing to pay this role and charge 0% administration fee. I mean, it's unfair to expect this of NGOs, so it's not putting pressure on anybody, but there are people who are just really willing to try and enable and facilitate and make things happen on the ground. So TMF is again funding those legal costs associated with the declaration of any of the City of Cape Town stewardship sites. Plus TMF gave 150,000 Rand last year towards erecting a fence. Very unattractive to your average donor. But essentially we had a landowner who said to the City of Cape Town, yes, they're willing to protect their land, but they need a fence to keep the cows out of the wetland. If the city could give them the fence, they could have the land. So it's really just about how the city have been able to enable more land. The NCC, so we've been funding the contribution of NCC in the form of, Andrew Penal has now been contracted by NCC to contribute towards a national biodiversity guideline, and also to help the Provincial Conservation Agency with strategic collaborative extension. Now, some of our risk takers, I have already spoken to all of the NGOs who might see their name come up here and say, we proudly view you as a risk taker, don't worry, we're watching this space to see what happens. So we've had the first two, as far as I know, conservation servitudes signed within the country. The first one was by the Overberg Renosterveld Conservation Trust, and then Grootbos Foundation signed just last month. So we see these as two potential new options to safeguarding biodiversity. There are title deed restrictions that come with these servitudes, and they are signed in favor of a third party. So yes, you need 3 parties to agree to basically overturn a servitude. We're waiting to see, because this could potentially be an answer for NGOs wanting to play a more active role in the landscape, but we don't want to rush out and spend huge amounts of money if it turns out that the land isn't really as secure as some of our other options. So we'll keep you updated. Conservation outcomes. So what we're proud of with this project is that they've really been working with the industry to try and bring about that financial sustainability we've been talking about all morning. Bring the industry in to make sure that the land that gets conserved is ultimately protected. But also we test in the regularization. This project is looking at land which people consider conservation areas, but when you try to find title deed, try to find who even owns the land, it's very tricky. So good luck to you guys, and we hope you get that one right. BirdLife South Africa, the project that they're running is they're looking at how to enhance the role that the NGO can play in protected area expansion. So as I said, potentially something like servitudes might play a role, but there are a whole bunch of extra challenges that the NGOs face that state organizations don't face. So they're trying to identify them and, if possible, address them. So as a small conservation trust fund, have we been smart? And this is where I say things get a bit wishy-washy. This is not a scientific assessment at all. This is potentially more of a marketing pitch, but anyway. So since the establishment of the province's Stewardship and Protected Area Expansion Reference Group and Program, and since there have been real protected area expansion strategies that are being implemented, TMF has invested 13 million Rand in towards land protection within the CFR. And 30% of that did come from a co-funder, Millennium Trust. That 13 million represents roughly 13% of our investments to date, okay? And more or less roughly during that same time frame, which is just under 20 years, let's say 15 years, the network has grown by 37%. So it seems like a sound program that we've been invested in. We can see the outcome, it's happening. Somebody is really doing work. Now, as I like to say, one day, when I'm pitching this to potential donors, what we can say is our contribution towards growing the network has been 27 of our rands have helped protect 1 hectare of the CFR. I'd love to get a stat like this from all the other organizations that have contributed to get a real sense of how relevant has TMF been in helping ensure that this has happened. And then if we overlay with that our Aichi targets and what we're trying to achieve, and if we had to operate at the same pace in the past, it means we'd need an extra 28 million to keep supporting all the projects and programs as they're happening at the moment. Yes. So anybody got 28 million for us? That's it. Thank you.